Hello, guys. I'm curious. Have you ever heard of this animal before? Let's go look at a Super Bowl ad and tell me if if you've ever seen such a creature. Let's look at the following. I did, it's only when I began my studies of epidemiology that I encountered such an animal that I had no idea existed. That's a marmot, and the marmot is most likely one of the culprits responsible for the greatest horror in Roman and medieval history. Because had that marmot been a little bit frisky that day and decided to go for the kiss, they would have killed us all. It's the marmot in which a bacterium known as Yersinia pestis resides. And it's that bacterium that is responsible for causing buboes on your bodies where to infect you. That is what gives us the Black Plague. Sorry, the Black Death, otherwise known as the one of many plagues that have infected humanity. Speaking of plagues affecting humanity on a biblical level, we've had plague, I've had fire, and then wasn't there a biblical plague dealing with sores? I got a nasty one in my eye. Madison, by the way, for us intellectuals who wear glasses, apparently wearing a mask and glasses at the same time, not only does it cause the glasses to fog up, little did I know, all that good juicy bacteria in our mouth, once it gets caught in the glasses, it can affect our eye. And sure enough, that's what's been delaying me. Never mind. Anyhow, yeah, the Black Death. Let's begin. We're going to look at the first phase, how it affected the Roman Empire. And then, of course, we're going to look at it in its medieval incarnation, how it affected the medieval Europe. Okay. Now, this combines two aspects of history I'm quite interested in. Pandemic and the role of the climate. And so what are you seeing is that if we could find a way to reconcile both fields, this is really environmental history, or how the kind of environment shapes history, which is more or less kind of a twofold process. It's humans shaping the environment, as a result, the environment shaping human society. So let's begin. So I showed you that ad from the Super Bowl. And yes, that is a marmot, bigger than a fox. The marmot is particularly, you could find them, I have never seen one, but apparently in Central Asia, which corresponds to Eastern Kazakhstan, Inner Mongolia, and Mongolia itself. And it's a combination of the marmot, the Mongol invasions, and the Pax Mongolica, which led to these kind of long-distance trade routes that allowed the bacterium to hitch a ride on rats and then travel unmolested. One of the consequences of the Pax Mongolica, well, we have a great primary source from Marco Polo, who describes, his ability to travel from Venice through Iran all the way to Karakorum, the capital of the Mongol Empire. Sorry, not Karakorum. He traveled to Khanbalik, which today we know as Beijing. Okay, his ability to travel unmolested to these from Venice to China? Well, that was a result of the Pax Mongolica, creating a single integrated trading network. Good for trade as well as for the transfer of fleas. We'll get to that. So this is a Yersinia pestis up close. This is what a bacterium looks like. So this is the problem with bacteria opposed to viruses. So let's go back to kind of looking at epidemiology. A bacterium is a much larger organism. And in fact, bacteria do get affected by viruses. And actually, the viruses might be our ally in terms of the evolutionary bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. Antibiotics can kill a bacterium. It cannot kill a virus, on the other hand, because a virus is just a piece of RNA or DNA. A bacterium, like I said, is a full-fledged, more or less organism. That's why we give it a two-coded name system, Yersinia pestis, for example. It's still with us. Hikers around hiker in Lake Tahoe just got infected recently. But like I said, unlike in the medieval era or the Roman Empire, the invention of antibiotics means you could kill it if you nip it in the bud. Unfortunately, in those places I mentioned, Inner Mongolia and China, Mongolia itself, and Kazakhstan, marmot is still consumed. Here's a tragic story. I'm not sure if I told you, but I love telling it anyway. There was this Kazakh couple on a honeymoon, and marmot kidney is reputed, according to kind of traditional medicine, to have health benefits, to give you a long life. So sure enough, this couple on a honeymoon ate raw kidney marmot, and they contracted, they got the bacteria, the Black Death, Yersinia pestis, and they died. I shouldn't be laughing, but it's so ironic. But eating this thing, they thought they would live forever, and they just croaked the next day because, of course, they were eating it in Inner Mongolia, and they couldn't get to a hospital to get antibiotics in time. That was last year. In other words, yeah, a couple died of the plague last year. Plague still reemerges in Madagascar. So the bacterium is definitely still with us, but thanks to antibiotics. Antibiotics know how to kill, well, biological things. Viruses aren't really considered living things. Like I said, because a bacteria is a more hardier organism, it could survive longer outside an animal host. And so I'll just give you an example of various bacteria that throughout history have been the great killers. Yersinia pestis is relatively young. It's a bacterium that probably evolved around 4,000 years ago. That's why we don't have major kind of historical evidence of outbreaks in the deep past, unlike smallpox, which has been around since 10,000, the virus, okay. Another bacterium causes tuberculosis. It transfers usually from cows. And when it transfers from a cow into milk, that's where it causes, now tuberculosis is just a nasty bacteria because not only can it live in milk, it's also transmitted by, it's an airborne. It's transmitted by humans. Once humans get it, we can transmit it to others through our respiratory system. And yeah, that's why pasteurization was so important. When Louis Pasteur had the idea, if we heat milk, we could kill all the critters in it. Sure enough, that killed the tuberculosis bacterium. But the whole point is, yeah, the bacterium could survive in milk outside of the cow. Usually viruses don't have, usually a virus, if you consume it, your digestional tract will kill it on the spot, thank God. And then what's the other? Cholera, which lives in water. Now, cholera wasn't a major problem until water was consumed in the Ganges Delta. And an infected person, because of rapid transit, think 1800s, most likely went to Russia, his stool was infected the soil or water there, and boom, what did he have? A cholera outbreak. And then just spread from Russia to Europe, to England, to the US, to Colombia, apparently, hence love in the time of cholera. Those are all bacteria. So let's begin with the Roman Empire. and see what is it about the Roman Empire whereupon it was afflicted with plagues. And it has to do with its superpower status and its geographical reach and the fact that it was in continuous perennial conflict with the superpower to the east, the Persian Empire and its various incarnations, in other words, with multiple dynasties, from the Parthians to the Sassanids. This is the problem, number one. Here you have a Roman Empire that straddles a ocean, I'm sorry, a sea, the Mediterranean, right? And thus the Roman Empire was, what's the word I'm looking for? The Roman Empire was vulnerable to diseases that came from Africa, as well as those Roman legions fighting the Parthians brought back diseases with them when they came back home after deployment. Okay. Combine that with fluctuations in the temperature, plus a Roman population that was too huge to be fed from the vicinity. Think Egyptian grain, how important was that for the survival of Rome? And now you have a perfect storm, if you will, in terms of making the Roman Empire dependent on, or let's say not dependent on environmental fluctuations. So if the plague, the bubonic plague we're going to study in particular is the plague of Justinian. But before we do that, we're going to study the other diseases that ravaged the Roman Empire. So one level we're looking at just Rome as in terms of a geographical region that straddles continents, making it vulnerable to disease. The other theme is Rome and its agricultural dependency, making it susceptible to climate change. Nonetheless, if you look at this European painting of the plague of Justinian much later, by the way, the Byzantine Empire would have looked nothing like this. But during this era of painting, particularly in the Renaissance, there was no such thing as historical accuracy. Constantinople was a great city. Well, this is what a great city looks like to a Northern European. But there was definitely a fellow named Sebastian whose help during the Justinian plague gave him saint status. So this is the historiographical question. Now, it's an article written by a climate scientist, but it brings up the very good question of, well, the historical problem we're dealing with, and this is it. Or let's say the problem with the historical approach we're dealing with is in the class, okay. So this is a class on popular media and history. You can't get more popular than Vanity Fair. And of course, what is Ugo also bringing up? The other media sphere that will be studied, the memosphere. The Roman Empire fell because of climate change. Of course, when climate change was very much an issue in July 2019. And look at his sentence number 2, because this is the question that we need to deal with. We have a problem with history. We often try to frame the past as if it were the same as the present. That's presentism, right? We project on the ancient our own troubles and fears. We have difficulties dealing with complex systems. And thus, this is, of course, what is historiography? In other words, take a sentence, what are we projecting on past pandemics? Our fears over COVID-19. Because now, of course, this was just, not too long ago, but July 2019, it was climate change that was on everyone's mind. Now, here he goes, oh snap, what is he doing? He's also now attacking an academic, Kyle Harper, a professor of classics at University of Oklahoma, who's written a series of articles called Climate Change Helped Destroy the Roman Empire, and that's what we're gonna study. Kyle Harper, of course, is an academic, but trying to get his academic ideas across through popular media. Okay. So this is the Vanity Fair article that is being referred to. This was written as far back as January 2011. So, what have we seen is, if we look at this kind of article from The Atlantic, a popular fascination with the fall of Rome. And the fascination, particularly for Americans, is this. It is, if you want to make an analogy, if America's on the decline, what is often done? You make a comparison with Rome. This is back in 2016, and it reflects this zeitgeist. The zeitgeist, or the angst of American decline, projected on, in the present, projected on the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, this is just for your information. This is a cistern built during Justinian's reign. This is a cistern in Constantinople, Istanbul today. Let's look, and if we could see just how Kyle Harper now is using Vox, a media, definitely a popular website that falls on the left, pro-Democrat, but also falling into the kind of BuzzFeed phenomena in terms of giving us numbers, lists, 6 ways what climate change and disease helped topple the Roman Empire. And this is as far back as 2017. So this is a subject that was looked at pre-pandemic. And usually what do you have in terms of clickbait? Well, in theory, you would have already clicked to get to this page. But these kind of catastrophic, cataclysmic events being depicted of Rome, of course, painted well after 1836, for example. In other words, the fascination with the fall of Rome, we could say, has been enduring. And if we continue, we see the same kind of imagery, just fascination with the fall of Rome. This is the 1770s. And by the way, so just kind of on a historical side, to dealing with popular media, of course, this comes from a period that we can call we can call this a Romantic era painting. Romantic era paintings, fascination with the sublime, the awe-inspiring power of nature, yet also nature striking back, a source of fear. That describes the Romantic era. Okay. So what does Professor Harper communicate to us? Okay. About the first Black Death, or the death that affected the realm of Justinian. That number one, its origins were the same as the second Black Death. Trade routes, the Silk Road, basically. The Silk Road carrying material from China to the Mediterranean. And he admits, it's funny to say one Black Death is more famous than the other, as is for this celebrity, but when we're going to study in the next part we're going to ask our question, what is our fascination with that particular period? Or that second Black Death? Why is it the celebrity of all pandemics? Nonetheless, while the second Black Death gets all the attention, look how deadly it was. Okay. Half of the entire population of the Roman Empire. And particularly, now think of this, how it affected the army. And what's important about this? Well, it's going to be addressed in a later article, but again, think of always the legions getting affected. We're going to see what's this, the legacy of infections like this. And just a few weeks later, now remember, Kyle Harper has just published his book, so this is the way he's getting publicity, using popular media. Aeon, like I said, is a very good popular media. In this case, it's in association with Princeton University Press. Again, we have our iconic image of the Roman Empire from the same author, Thomas Cole. Again, Romantic era imagery of kind of nature and the decay of the Roman Empire. So what can we glean from this article? Well, now he's addressing a historiographical problem. And he admits, like Ugo, who attacked him, that every historian of Rome has been asked to say where we are today on Rome's cycle of decline. And historians, as a kind of a disciplinary group, we skirm at such attempts to use the past. Because in our field, we do not say history repeats itself, nor comes packaged into moral lessons. Okay? But look, again, he is using a lesson. It demonstrates human frailty. Now look at this word he used, modern anthropogenic climate change. Okay, already a historian here is going into the climate change debate. The minute he uses anthropogenic, and the term anthropogenic is quite important, because it's a relatively recent but very debated term introduced by a geologist. And what was this geologist arguing was during a conference on geology where a presenter was referring to the geological period known as the Holocene. This one geologist objected, saying, no, the Holocene has ended. So the Holocene has been, for most of recorded history, the geological epoch we've lived in. Think ice ages, the ice age ending. Here we have the Holocene. Okay. Arguing. Okay, so I mean, you think Bronze Age, Iron Age, all Holocene. That now we've entered a new temporal juncture. The Anthropocene is when, on the path to modernity, humanity had the ability to affect the surrounding environment to its detriment. In other words, the Anthropocene now, when does it begin? Well, some would argue the Industrial Revolution, when humans first started to emit carbon dioxide as a result of burning coal into the environment, to 1945, where carbon dioxide emissions really took off. Anyway, here's our historian entering the debate. The modern anthropogenic climate change is perilous. In other words, climate change is always with us. It's been nothing new, Harper is arguing. What is he arguing in sentence number 2 is the intensity the intensity of this process is more or less now being directed as a result of humanity's progress. Now here, Harper brings kind of a diagnosis of the various maladies that affected the Roman Empire. Plasmodium falciparum, what we otherwise known as malaria. Now, of course, remember, malaria was the faulty Roman term that attributed this disease to the swampy air or bad air, malaria. Okay, what causes that? That is a protozoa. And protozoas are, unlike a bacteria or a virus, you could take medication to prevent them entering to you or mitigate its effects on you. But a protozoa is a much bigger organism than a bacteria, and that will lodge into your kidneys and do what? Cause flare-up of malaria throughout the rest of your life. Then we have leprosy and tuberculosis, both bacteria, by the way. Both are caused by bacteria. The Antonine Plague coincided with the end of the optimal climate regime. In other words, the optimal climate regime, basically good for the agriculture. And so remember, the Antonine Plague is the first major plague to affect the Roman Empire. That was the global debut of smallpox. And then we had another one called the Plague of Cyprian. We're not sure what caused it, but that helped a new religion at the time called Christianity take off. Because what did the Christians do that made an oppression? They took care of the sick and dying, and that helped only swell their numbers. Now, Justinian was leading a contracted Roman Empire on the rebound. It's often called the Eastern Roman Empire, but under his rule, more or less what was the territory of the old Roman Empire had been reconquered, and then what happens? The plague hits. So here Harper is giving us the science, telling us which bacteria. It's relatively young age, and of course, it's zoonotic origin. And when we say a zoonotic origin, the animal in which the pathogen emerged from. I didn't even know there was another mammal called a giant gerbil, but apparently those are also common in Central Asia. Now, this is how the bacterium jumps. The reservoir rodent is the marmot. The marmot is just a big, nasty rodent, okay? The amplification host is the black rat. That's where the rats get the bad rap, which live close to humans, so they get infected. And then what is the next vector? The flea. The flea which bites the rat, and the minute the rat takes in the bacterium, when the flea bites you, it is literally vomiting. It hates this bacteria. It's puking its guts out into your bloodstream, and now you're infected. It was an accident of early globalization. And again, so what is he reminding us? Climate change and disease evolution have been the wild cards of human history. They've been the invisible forces shaping human history. And I would argue, if we want to say kind of enduring aspects of human history, climate change, disease, and taxes, we can argue, have been, if we want to talk about continuity and change, it's those three elements. And then finally, sentence number 2, making the argument that the environment has to be brought in terms of understanding history. Okay, John Gray is not a historian, but perhaps one of my favorite philosophers of modernity. And every time I'm referring to modernity, of course, I'm taking from John Gray's philosophy. Now, this is our first post-pandemic piece we're examining, and does it follow the pattern of other popular media? The New Statesman is a British journal, tends to fall on the right, but again, we see our commonality, the chaos afflicting the Roman Empire. Now, what is our philosopher doing here? Number 1, he is reminding us of a consequence that the Kyle Harper skipped. With the weakening Roman Empire, an empire weakened by plague, what did that do? It opened up the Eastern Mediterranean for conquest by armies that were in recent relative isolation, the tribes of Arabia. When they converted to Islam and organized into a single army, they were able then to attack a weakened Eastern Roman Empire. Now, of course, the Byzantine Empire was attacked in the 670s, so still a lot of time, but the argument here is the plague kind of gave the Eastern Roman Empire a knockout blow that made it vulnerable. And of course, now, what does John Gray do? He quotes Harper again. Okay? And in this popular media, without being able to read Harper's book, we get some more insights. Okay? Looking at something important, the ecology of an empire. And again, bringing the other elements that Harper referred to early, agriculture. Now, in this case, this quote is quite a choice quote, because remember, with agriculture, usually you have to reclaim land. And when you reclaim land, of course, you're creating agriculture fields in basically swamps, bringing humans into closer contact with mosquitoes. Think all of Rome is a floating swamp, basically. And then, of course, deforestation for agricultural land creates pools of water, which mosquitoes use to breed. The Romans were environmental engineers at the end of the day. Now, so here we have a reference to the geological epoch. So we have the Pleistocene, the Ice Age. And it's really when we enter the Holocene around 12,000 years ago, okay? That basically, that's most of the history we study, because around this time, that's when, writing comes into form. Then what happened during Justinian's reign? Remember, we talked about the Roman climate optimum. What is John Gray is also doing a pretty good job of telling us about environmental history. Pretty good for a philosopher. The end of Justinian's reign, towards the end, was suffering from the late antique Little Ice Age, which lasted again for about 150 years. So this is really big history, okay? And of course, around this time, it's also not surprising that this is John Gray's specialty. Eschatology and apocalypse, the fears of the end times, or how societies try to promise new afterlives, okay? Whether it's pre-modern forms or the modern forms, such as, well, communism, which promised kind of earth on heaven, the classless society. Eschatology, of course, is just a fancy word for studying the end times. Just as the combination of climate change with pandemics undermined a ruling classical worldview, the virus has shaken the modern faith. And the modern faith is this: humans can reshape the natural world as it pleases. In other words, shape the natural world to contribute to this process of mass production and mass consumption. And what is John Gray saying? Basically, what is modernity is a narrative of human advance. And what humbled that narrative of human advance? A simple piece of RNA, a simple chain of RNA that we call a virus. Okay, so that's John Gray's contribution to the history. So then the second part of this lecture, we're going to be looking at then the second bubonic plague.